Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. Today we have a special event. I am at the event of a UPF event. It's with Laura Qureshi. She set this up, and it's in March. It's a windy Saturday, but there's a lot of people about to show up. But before it gets really hectic, we have the privilege of talking to a few people. And right now we have with us today Michael Wolfe, who's with UPF, Unity Productions. And we're going to talk to him about a few interesting things that his organization has done. Thank you, Michael, for being here. And could you, well, what I do know about UPF is the Sultan and The Saint that they helped produce. Would you tell us a little bit about what you do with your organization and what your role is in that?
Yes, of course. So I'm one of the two people who started UPF 20 years ago. Myself and Alex Cronemer, who's also here today. Alex and I were sitting on a plane together for about 16 hours as strangers 20 years ago, and we got to talking. He is a Muslim, and so was I. That was enough of a surprise right there. And we began to talk about what might happen to improve the storytelling of our people, of the Muslim people in the United States in particular. We noticed he having some work in the government and I being a writer, we noticed that oftentimes other people were telling the stories about Muslims, and they weren't telling them very well. Sometimes just inefficiently, and sometimes they didn't want to tell them well. So we cooked up to search for a topic that would bring the entire Muslim community, then about 4 million people in the United States, together in some way, and also help us to present them to a much larger viewing public. And we thought to do this with a documentary film. So we set out to do it and ultimately found a broadcaster in PBS who did a national broadcast of the film. And very shortly before we concluded those arrangements, 9/11 happened. And all of us were stunned for a few weeks, wondering what would happen now. And we realized amongst us, both broadcasters and producers, that if anything, this work was more important than it had been. It already was important, but that added an extra amount of necessity for it. And we found that there was a huge viewing audience for this film. We had thought to make a movie and go on about our business doing other things, frankly. But this film was watched by millions of people the first night. And then it was shown, kind of incredibly to me still, 500 times in 1 year on PBS in various regions of the US. 1/4 or another of the US was watching this film virtually every night. So we realized that there was a real audience for authentic, nuanced stories about Muslims and about Islam. And so we set about making another one, and then another one, and then another one, and here we are on our 10th film. And I'll stop there.
And it was beautifully done. I have to admit that I am part of Daughters of Abraham, and for one of our meetings, we decided we will watch the movie. And it was very, very well received. So one of the reasons why I was so excited about this interview is because I'm sure in my group, the women, the sisters that we all watch together are going to be very excited to hear from someone who came up with the idea and who was part of this whole production of this movie. So just going back to what you said, you were on a plane and you happened to come across this conversation with another man who, I mean, both of you don't look like typical Muslims.
That's certainly
How did
true.
That conversation come about?
Well, then particularly. I mean, now, honestly, there are a fair number of Muslims who look like I do, who are white and, kind of born and raised here and talk the way I talk. But in 1997, not so many. I don't know how it happened. Alhamdulillah, things happen. And it was a nudge in the right direction for both of us. And we hit it off. He had read a book that I wrote. That's always a good thing to start a conversation with an author, And And he worked in the Labor Department and the State Department. And I'm fascinated by government, particularly when it serves people, and both of those institutions do. So we just had a lot in common, I think. And,
that's really interesting. I feel like that was definitely meant to be. As I'm sure that you have.
More.
What are now that The Sultan and the Saint was nominated for an Emmy, what are your future visions of which type of movies and topics you're going to be looking into?
Well, we want to expand. We always want to do more. We always want to have more clout, I guess you would say, more distribution. We've always been interested in a great variety, being able to provide almost a menu to particularly teachers in schools. These films are used in tens of thousands of classrooms around the country, every state in the union, I'm proud to say. So they're educational tools, and we want to have a real variety, partly because the Muslim American community is various. The African American community, the Pakistani community, the Arab community, the Malaysian community, it goes on and on and on. And we want to represent everyone in a certain way, but we also want to show the whole picture together. So we have a very broad menu of films, everything from African American antebellum South heroic story to a piece about a young man who simply wants to learn how to fly an airplane, but it happens to be in the middle of Patriot Act II in 2006, and people who are running airplane companies and flight schools are not too interested or a little afraid of teaching Muslims how to fly small planes because of what happened. So can you have your dream, in a bad time, was the theme of that film. We have done stand-up comic movies. We have done a film about, couple of films about medieval history, the kind of cultural roots of Islam and Islamic art. So again, like a wide variety, a big menu, so that people can pick and choose. And so that there's a broad representation of the very broad spectrum. There may only be 6 or 7 million Muslims in the United States now, maybe less, I don't know, nobody's counting. But there are 1.5 billion or more Muslims in the world, and this is a very large faith community. So to represent it accurately, even by the diaspora that's in the United States, is a complex job. And it keeps us interested and busy and doing a variety of programming.
You mentioned that you started this before 9/11, this idea, and working on this.
Yes.
But because this is a very sensitive topic, Islam, Muslims, trying to portray Muslims in an appropriate light, in a more realistic light, what challenges have you faced?
Well, the first challenge was convincing broadcasters that there was an audience for such a thing. They weren't so sure, but our performance with the first film, which was the story of the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it was essentially the seerah, essentially the history of his life and of the formation of very early Islam. Tens of millions of people were fascinated to hear about it. It wasn't just Muslims who wanted to watch this movie, it was Muslims and many others. And that actually taught us something, that we could bring Muslims and others together to watch a movie like this and start a discussion. These are, as you said, very sensitive topics for people. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be. Americans are they're very reticent about religion. Religion is something that is very private for many people. Also, in America, we've been through a very nasty period in the 50s and 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, of a kind of use of religion that wound up having some of its advocates thrown in jail, some of them very embarrassed for their real way they lived, as opposed to what they said, the hypocrisy of it. So that, people were a little backed off the notion of even talking about religion. And if you did, well, did that sort of make you suspect? I'm just talking about the background of American history and religion in the very recent past, particularly with televangelism and so on. So to be making films that have to do with a group of people who are in the headlines as like a very small number of terrorists wind up pushing a population into the headlines on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're dealing with a viewing public, which watches TV a lot, but which is very sensitive about religion and television. People don't want to be sold a bill of goods. They want to see something authentic. They want to see something for real, and also something that's different, that's not selling anything, that's presenting. So this is an art form, it's a storytelling. It's storytelling. How do you tell a story that will grab people and really inform them and change hearts and minds and take some of these deadly stereotypes out of their brains and supplant them or replace them with some real storytelling, some truth, some authenticity? That's the challenge, and that's what we keep trying to kind of raise the bar on, to do better and better at it.
If the audience wants to watch The Sultan and the Saint, I know when it first came out, we had to go through PBS and whatnot. Well,
Yes.
How would they be able to watch this?
Well, there are many ways. You can stream it. You can go onto our website. I think it's $5. You can watch all of our films over a month. And it's like pennies, to watch a movie. There are PBS sells DVDs. You can own it that way. So there are many different platforms you can see it on. That would Google it and you'll find them. It's pretty easy, particularly these days with downloading and streaming and so on and so forth.
So in terms of this particular movie, I'm going to talk about this one since I watched this one recently, this year. Actually 2018. What really interested me is why pick this story? What was your motivation from, Islam has a huge history, a vast history in many different countries and all over different periods of time. But why this story?
Well, we wanted to tell a story that we've been wanting for some time, to find a story in the middle of a bad time, in the middle of a time where violence seemed insurmountable and war had gone on for a long time, a time in some ways not unlike our own, but different. We wanted to find a time like that in which a Christian and a Muslim actually not only got along, but made something happen that changed that drift toward unconscious behavior and toward a kind of reestablishing stereotypes over and over again without anybody even thinking about them. Well, that's the Crusades. The Crusades are a perfect model for that. And inside that vast history, 150, 200 years, told on two sides, because there's the European side, large libraries full of books about the Crusades in the Western world, and many, many chronicles in Arabic, local journals and so on the other side, on the Arab side or the Muslim side or the Middle Eastern side, however you want to look at it. We wanted a period, and we wanted heroes. It's my personal feeling that the reason things continue to go on this way is that nobody's brave enough to stop them. And every once in a while we see a Mandela, or we see there are a handful of people in a century who seem to rise above the pollution of power, to actually change the way things go, at least while they're alive. And I find that not only inspiring, but I find that to be a reality that we should be encouraging in our kids and in ourselves, to have the nerve to change things, to question. So we found a story about the most famous Christian next to Jesus who ever walked the earth, St. Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi, this very simple man whose message was simply be like Jesus. Really, when you boil it all down, that's what it's like. Well, that's a very big demand in the middle of a very corrupt Vatican history at that period in time. This is the time, getting close to the time of the Medicis. This is a very bad time for the Vatican. And he challenged them. He challenged them unquestionably and with great heroism. And he had such a following that they couldn't deal with him. They had to accept him, make him a saint, frankly. And he changed things. Well, this man happened, we found, another page of history that's fallen out of the books, to have met with the Sultan of Egypt in the middle of the Fifth Crusade in a very dynamic meeting, not just a kind of, hi, how are you, diplomatic meeting, but a very dynamic exchange, which on both sides seemed to have changed things, which really began to write the end of the period of the Crusades. So for a moment like that to present itself, it's sort of, why wouldn't you make a movie about that? And the Franciscan group inside the Roman Catholic Church is enormous. Millions and millions and millions of people all over the world. So we felt that there would be a large audience for this. And we were fortunate enough to be able to find their true stories as opposed to what had been forgotten, lost, or hagiographic, sort of built up and not really exactly what happened at all, but a kind of manufactured story to serve other purposes. We were able to get to the real story. Well, that's what we want, right, is authentic storytelling. So, long answer to your question, but that's why we chose this story, and the last thing is, I love to make a movie about something, when people look at it, they put their finger to their cheek and they say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Well, now you know it. Now what?
So this is Asima Silva with Perspectives, and as you know, with this show, sometimes we have really interesting guests, and today's one of those days. We have Muhammad Ali's daughter, Maryum Ali, with us today at the UPF event. But today she is taking some time to talk with us, and we're going to have a heart-to-heart talk. Thank you so much, Maryum, for coming.
Thank you. It's an honor
and taking
to be
the
here.
time out to talk with me.
You're welcome.
And what I want to begin by saying is, everybody knows you because of your father. Mm-hmm. I did not have the privilege of meeting your father, but I have to say I still watch his interviews.
Yes.
I still watch his words of wisdom. And just the enormity of his wisdom that he just had within him, mm-hmm, and the way he was able to explain it, it's just tremendous, mm-hmm, and it's timeless. And
right,
and you are the oldest of his 9 children, mm-hmm, so you had the most amount of time, mm-hmm, with him than most people probably have had. First of all, can you explain to us, you're a social worker, you're giving
Yes.
back. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'm sure you always get asked about your
Yeah.
dad, but please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I am a social worker. I actually was in entertainment for a while, and I saw how his platform impacted so many people in a real inspirational way. And deep down, I'm an artist at heart. So I used to do music and comedy and write, and I did want to do it for the good of people and to be impactful. But that business, it's so seedy and crazy. My father warned me about that business, and I wasn't fulfilled. So I got into social work, dealing with juvenile delinquency prevention, youth and family development. My grandmother and my father were a great influence in that work. He loved children. He understood the impact of role modeling and really helping to shape them and mold them and inspire them. And again, a lot of kids in our country are marginalized in certain areas with poverty and institutional type of structures that aren't for them. So I've been doing that for a long time, for over 15 years. And fortunately, I was able to have my dad come visit the kids I work with in South Los Angeles, and he loved the work that I'm doing, and I was proud to make him proud. But I've always, he always asked me what my purpose was. And as a little girl, he put us on the tape recorder and asked, what's your purpose? Those tapings are in a film called I Am Ali, about him as a father as well as the personality he became. And I always wanted to help people. So doing that in many different ways, but passionately doing it in the field of social work, working with at-risk populations.
So that's interesting. You're talking to us as, your father, whereas we've seen him with a different perspective and a different light. What are your pieces of wisdom that you took from him that you would love to share with the world?
Wow.
And I know that's
so many.
hard. That's so
it's
hard.
not even hard. It's voluminous. I mean, there's so much that he espoused and taught us. I would say the first thing is, as a Muslim, hold on to your faith. Hold on, hold on. You'll be tried and tested by people, by your environment, by situations, by your failures, by your successes. And that's what Islam is. You know, we know we're going to be tried, and to hold on. And if you let go a little bit or a lot, grab on again, and always ask for forgiveness and mercy, and you know, just and grow as a Muslim, learn, evolve. There's so much that we will never understand before our death. Even your most esteemed scholars are minuscule in knowledge compared to Allah's knowledge. So that's first and foremost, because that is what really maintained him. When you talk about him being able to express himself, he had that foundation of his faith and his divine purpose on this earth, and anything that attacked that or wasn't in alignment with that, he had to question, confront, and deal with, whether it came in the form of social oppression in this country, social oppression of all people, you know, fighting for all people. And I think that's what how he got his worldwide appeal, is because he did stand up for his faith against the American military. I'm not going to fight in the Vietnam War because this is not a war that God approves for me as a Muslim man. And that standing up against social oppression, which takes many different shapes and forms, but at the end of the day, it does the same thing to a wide array of people. It kills, it destroys, it dehumanizes. It's the mistreatment of another human group. We're all human, but it's mistreatment group upon group. So when he went against that kind of war, to fight in that kind of war, to kill people that had the same color as he had, when in the United States, African Americans were suffering their own type of oppression from their own government, that resonated throughout the globe, you know? So, don't be afraid to stand up, even if you have to make sacrifices. You know, I used to love music and entertainment business, but I said, you know, this is an uphill battle that's never going to go downhill. It's too much going on, corrupt, for a Muslim woman to be able to really pierce. And am I going to be able to impact young people and evolve as a person in that field? I didn't think I could, so I had to leave it. So he taught me that, you know, you have to make certain sacrifices, and it's always a struggle.
Is that what led you into social work?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things. I had a cousin who was murdered from gang violence, and gang prevention, juvenile delinquency prevention is the area I went in because of that. But I'm the oldest of 9, and I've always been kind of a big sister that cared deeply for my younger siblings and tried to uplift them and support them. And it was just in me to want to do that. But my father, you know, teaching me you're gonna have to sacrifice some things that you might love or might enjoy for what your core belief system is.
And during his funeral, the whole world watched. Mm-hmm. He brought together everyone.
Yes.
In the Trump era, and that was just admirable, and just miraculous in its own sense.
Right.
What were you thinking and feeling during that time?
I felt very blessed, actually. My tears came maybe months after the memorial. I felt grateful that my father lived 74 years. I understand the mortality rates of black men. You know what I'm saying? And I have friends whose parents or fathers did not make it to 74. When my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's in the 80s, I didn't think he would make it to his 70s. You see what I'm saying? So, and we saw him go through that process and go through it gracefully with dignity and acceptance of what he had. So I thought I was very grateful that he made it 74 years. And I was happy. So many people, the love is just culminated right in Louisville, Kentucky. And I cannot tell you how beautiful that whole day felt. Even in Louisville, Kentucky, on the day of his funeral, there was almost no crime in the city. And Louisville has, you know, their crime rates and the gang crime is pretty intense there. And it's like everything just shut down for him. And I just think how beautiful, that this man, so Muslim and African American, in this country could make the world stand still for just a second to acknowledge him. And he, like I said, if he, wherever he's at, he would say, it's not me, He always felt that God works through people, and he was just a vessel. And so he would have been very grateful as well.
So when you think about your father, what are the moments, what is the one moment that you think about when you think about him?
Oh gosh, one moment, I hate to be a broken record, but praying with my father, reading Quran with my father. See, those are the things that I could take with me. I can't take the first car he bought me. I don't know where that car is. I can't take, I used to visit him in his big home. That's no longer there. The only thing I can really take is the spiritual moments. That keeps me strong. But that's the serious side. The funny side would be he's a practical joker. He loved to make people laugh, and he got his kicks out of scaring people in the house. He would set up little pranks around the house to just petrify us, all in the name of fun. But that was his fun side, So jokes and his practical jokes around the house. Just my father enjoyed himself wherever he went, and I do that as well, whether I'm just walking down to the corner at a Starbucks and another thing that's prominent in my mind with my father is how he treated people. People want to talk about him as the humanitarian, but I really do believe that he believed that his daily treatment of people carries more weight spiritually than the big humanitarian efforts, right? Because what we do and how we deal with people every day is what really matters. And he was so kind, and I would see him with folks who didn't have a lot, and he treated them the same way he would treat a prime minister of a country. And that's prominent in my mind. So just kindness, and I really do believe that is energy that you put out that comes back to you.
So I'm just going to ask a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
You might have already answered it. We all, as children of parents, we all say we're never going to be like that part of a parent. And then you find yourself as you grow older and you say, oh my gosh, I am my parent. What would be that for you? I have to say, I have to give some credit to my grandfather, my mother's father, because my grandfather raised me most of my life. I had a lot of quality time with my father. My parents divorced when I was in 3rd grade. So we didn't live with my dad. We visited him all the time. So and my grandfather had Parkinson's as well. He passed 1 year to the day of my father. It's amazing. Both of my fathers passed on the same day. And I just in honor of him, because he was a wonderful Muslim man, my grandfather, Sultan Ali, he would always turn the lights out to conserve energy. And I would just roll my eyes up in my head. But now that I'm paying the bills, I'm turning all the lights out. So I just want to pay respect to him. In terms of my dad, what does he do? You know what I do all the time? It's not that I didn't want to do it, it's that I didn't think I would do it. My father used to obsess over the passage of time. For example, he would say, time flies. You're 10 years old now? You're going to be 50 tomorrow. And I thought he was crazy. I'm like, what are you talking about, Dad? That's silly. You're a 15, you'll be married next week. I'm like, what are you talking about? So he really was fascinated by how time flew. And I'm telling you, I'm the same way. I have younger siblings, they're in their 20s. I'm 50 now. Time flies so fast. Just wait. And I always do that. It's like, anyone who knows me, and I didn't think I would do that. But it takes age for you to understand that, because I'm sitting here 50 years old. Yes, I'm 50. And I remember being 21 like yesterday. Like, I don't even feel 50, so now I get it. But I did not understand when he was talking about that. I just thought, man, that's a long time away when I get older. But no, it isn't. It's a blink of an eye. So you get invited everywhere to do speeches. what are the topics that you try to touch
Yeah.
upon so that you can spread
Yeah.
as much message to the
Well,
audience as possible?
Majority of the speeches I do are in my field. So organizations that work in social and human services, a large array of those organizations may have me at conferences or fundraisers. And what I do is I try to marry what I do to what they do, because in social and human services there are a lot of similar concepts that how we operate and do our practice. So that's a majority of the talks that I do. I also speak on how my father and family dealt with his journey with Parkinson's. So hospitals, certain pharmaceutical companies, Parkinson's organizations. I share that story because that was a huge challenge he had to overcome. He had his ups and downs, and hearing his story kind of inspires people dealing with that disease. And also getting the family involvement and how family should be involved in a person that's, dealing with a disease like that. And sometimes I do Islamic events. I'm more comfortable doing the things that are in my lane, like the social services. And then I may do Black History Month or learning from the lessons of Muhammad Ali and other civil rights activists. I've spoken on that. Yeah.
So you mentioned you had children.
I don't. But I actually raised two of my sisters on my mother's side, not my
Okay.
father's side. I have two sisters. Well, I helped with the family raising them that I took custody of, and they lived with me. And one just stopped living with me recently. She's in her 20s now. She's a graphic designer. So I've raised children that aren't my own, but I don't have children.
Well, I'm sure sure they are learning
and I've
from
worked
you.
with a lot of kids. The youth in social work, my group that I work with was about 10 to 15 years old. That's the age group I work with.
So what would you like for us to finish up for our audience to know about you and a little bit of wisdom, and what would you like to leave them with?
I would just say that I think the best advice that covers a broad range of life would be we're always growing and learning, and you never know everything. Try to learn from everyone you meet, whether you're learning their culture, whether you're learning their perspective. I think what's wrong with the world is that we are in our own bubbles. We're in our family bubbles, we're in our race bubbles, we're in our national bubbles, and we're humans. We're all related. We're all related through Adam and Eve. And the world is so vast and complex, and there's so much to learn, and to be stuck in yes, we have our own culture and we love who we are, that's fine. But God did create us differently to get to know one another. And I would say constantly grow, because you never know what will make you evolve as a human being. So always seek knowledge wherever it's at.